فيروس COVID-19 أزمة وباء كورونا المستجد.
This is an international challenge.
This is a really serious problem that we have to take seriously.
الدواء والغذاء هذا خط أحمر لدولة الإمارات ولا تشلون هم.
جهود جبارة تبذلها دولة الإمارات للحد من انتشار فيروس كورونا المستجد، وذلك من خلال التعاون بين كل من شركة استراتا للتصنيع وشركة هانيويل العالمية لإنتاج كمامات N95.
هنا في مبادلة نود أن نشارككم رسالة أمل. سننتصر بفضل اتحادنا وقيادتنا الحكيمة، وسنكون أقوى، وذلك لأننا نعمل ونخلص.
With that wonderful, powerful introduction from Mubadala, good afternoon to our clients and friends joining us today at ECHO's 2020 Summit, for the first time in more than 20 years, virtually rather than together in person. This is the second in our series of 7 mini leadership soundbites we're hosting throughout this month, reflecting the importance of leadership, reputation, and trust at a time of great change and challenge. If you can't make all our sessions, they are being recorded for you, and they'll be available on our website at the end of the month for you to look at your leisure and share with others. Just a reminder, at the end of our brief half-hour discussion, which we're about to have, there will be 10 minutes of Q&A, so please stay with us for that, but also use the chat function to post any comments or questions you'd like me to raise for you on your behalf. So, to help set the scene of our topic today, ECHO conducted an integrated study of stakeholder interviews, consumer polls, and social listening to better frame and understand the changes to trust and expectation at a time of COVID-19. Now, the top thing we found was that business leaders' most significant learning from the pandemic was having the culture and capacity to adapt and pivot. And that's very much what we're going to be talking about today. And you'll see closely behind that is the attention to people first issues. And that's mental health, well-being, working from home, all those things that encompass working remotely or working in a hybrid fashion or working physically. However, we cross-reference that with actually what people thought. And if you look at our next slide, which is drawn from a poll among 1,000 employees, both in the US and in the UK. Sorry to our speaker, we didn't have this across the UAE or globally, but it starts to show that business leaders feel they're pivoting, feeling they're changing, feeling they're focusing on people. Employees are not all convinced. And I suspect that's a feature of the organizations they either know or have been connected with. And as we always find with these things, some organizations are a lot better than others. But on average, employees are not necessarily feeling that they are put first and foremost central to businesses' concerns. So today, we're going to hear from an organization that really is putting people first and also has changed dramatically as a result during this global crisis. And not just looking at the crisis as an opportunity, but also considering it as a so-called vintage year. So I'm really looking forward to a very positive and exciting exchange with my dear friend, Brian Lott. So please join me in welcoming Brian, the Chief Communications Officer of the global investment company based in Abu Dhabi, Mubadala. And Mubadala's strapline includes, "We measure progress differently," which I just love. Brian. So Brian, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being with me today. I'm sorry we're not side by side. I'm sorry I'm not next to you by the beach in Dubai, but you know, we're doing what we can. So really looking forward to our exchange. And I think perhaps for those who don't know Mubadala well, obviously as we do, and drawing on from that wonderful video you just shared with us, can you just tell people a little bit about Mubadala, but also how it was impacted by COVID and how you've managed through this particular crisis?
Sure,
Brian.
sure. First of all, Sandra, thank you. Great to be with you all and to have this opportunity to share just a little bit of what we've gone through. Probably a lot of things in common with many of you watching today. Mubadala is about 20 years old. It's a sovereign wealth fund. It's the UAE's second largest sovereign wealth fund after the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority. It's different because we do things differently from other sovereign funds. Many of them, Norwegian Pension Fund, some of the others I've mentioned, the Singapore wealth funds, they tend to be more passive investors. What Mubadala does is it takes stakes in companies and tends to be a more active investor, sits on board seats and manages assets here in the UAE for the benefit of the economy of the United Arab Emirates. And when we entered 2020, we had just come off our best financial year in the company's history, ending 2019. We were all at Davos thinking big thoughts about things like ESG and the implications of stakeholder intense pressure and scrutiny on all of our companies and what that meant for 2020. And really about a month later, the implications of COVID became quite clear. And for us, it was something obviously that none of us had ever experienced before. We happen to be a government-owned entity, so we take a lot of our cues from the Abu Dhabi government in terms of whether to continue business as usual, what safety precautions to abide by. And of course, our first thought was to our employees. So we really had to adopt a kind of safety mindset. We went from working all in the office, and most of our employees are based in Abu Dhabi. We work out of a couple of campuses in Abu Dhabi, and they were immediately sent home to be safe, stop the social interaction in the city. And we went through a kind of three-part shift, if you will. The first was this kind of work in place mindset. The second was kind of shifting how we work in terms of working from home and making sure people had the right equipment. And then we had to get used to this adjustment of the blur between coffee and your first meeting, sometimes not always in your old suit and tie, but in more casual attire. And then when it came to late hours, like everyone else around the world, this sort of disintegration of regular work hours. We're an international organization, but for us, I would say those first 60 days of working from home were a real culture shock.
One of the things around putting people first is also considering how you live your values and your behavior. Yeah, and either is it challenging or reinforcing your culture? Just staying with the people side to begin with, what have you noticed as a result of what you've done, and perhaps things that you've done differently maybe that other organizations haven't done? So what have been some of your learnings or some of the surprises that you've had out of your focus on people, your very rigorous focus on people?
Yeah, I think, by ensuring that everyone was safe, that was step one. I think the biggest surprise was that we, for many years, particularly since we invest heavily in technology, we've always been advocates for things like telepresence and WebEx and using technology. We weren't very good at it, frankly. We didn't have a standard platform that we were consistently using. We tended to prefer travel. That's just kind of the way of doing business here, is face-to-face. And things that we could have entertained a long time ago, we just never put in place. They were too, we preferred the way of working until COVID hit. And what it did was that it really forced us to adapt to use technology and work remotely. And what surprised, I think, everyone, including our leadership, was how quickly we got into the new way of working, how much more efficient it was, how easy it was. We had already invested quite a bit in a platform called Blue Jeans, which is like Zoom or Microsoft Teams, allows for this sort of collaborative discussion wherever you are, car or mobile or, your desktop at home. And I think the initial thought was, how are we going to manage all of these people, and will we all stay productive? And about 45 days in, we started doing employee surveys. And what we noticed was that people managers and employees found themselves to suffer no drop in productivity. What we did see, of course, was a disruption to the business. Because one of the things that happened, obviously, in the month of March was that a lot of our classic industries in manufacturing, as well as our consumer-focused industries, just suffered a massive kind of a decline in business uptake as people retracted based on the virus and what it meant. And so we had to almost take this day by day. But what didn't stop, and what was really surprising and pleasing, was the level of interaction and the level of productivity that remained. And frankly, I'm not sure I would say that COVID did us any favors, but what it did do was that it forced us to transition to technology much more quickly than we would have had it not happened. And I think it's here to stay.
Did you find, now we've passed that initial 45 days and we're all still in it in various ways. Have you found any issues around mental health for your teams and your people? And how have you addressed that?
Yeah, I think we were all worried with the dramatic drop off. We had a couple of weeks, I'll go back to maybe the first couple of weeks in April, where we felt that with the decline in business and the decline in events, particularly from a communication standpoint, I'll just talk about my team. I was worried, how long is this going to last? How do we keep people motivated? I've got 50 people on my team. 20 of them or so are engaged in sponsorship and community activity. Obviously, that came to a halt. And what we did, I think there were ripples of that across the company. What we decided to do really was convert the company in April and May, and you saw some of this in the video, from an investment company to a global relief company. So we started reaching out to our portfolio companies through a campaign we created under the comms team called We Are Dedicated, or Namal Nukhlis, which is the Arabic version. It's part of the national anthem of the UAE. Means something similar, but it's very profound, a sense of community, a sense of jumping in and helping one another. And we started to see across our portfolio this desire to want to contribute. So our healthcare facilities that are here in the UAE, obviously on the front lines of treatment, some of our manufacturing industries that use clean rooms and semiconductors, for example, our semiconductor business in Germany and the US, started taking their gloves and masks and gowns and giving those away when there were shortages of personal protective equipment in those geographies. We converted some of our lines of production from composites in the aerospace industry into making the N95 super protective masks, particularly for frontline healthcare workers. And that was incredibly motivating. And it gave us something great and productive to do. So by keeping people busy and engaged in something that was so positive, we sort of overcame that lull, if you will, of what do we do next? You know, it was kind of a jarring intrusion on our 2020 plan. We never could have predicted it. We came up with it, and I think it served us really, frankly, until late June, early July, when the business really recovered and we could get back to a kind of business as usual for our regular investment activity. And since then, we've seen, you know, and again, we've been asking people and providing mental health wellness consultation and health helplines, that sort of thing. It's really kind of, I think, come to the aid of people who both needed to stay engaged with their teams, and also know that there was a resource if they needed it.
I'm sure there'll be questions around the right kind of culture and leadership and in a way, the entrepreneurial response that you've been managing through your portfolio companies and across the group. And I'm sort of calling on those with us here today just to raise your questions in the chat line, which we'll come back to. Staying with your role as a CCO, a Chief Communication Officer, and Brian, specifically within Mubadala, but also I think what you see more broadly, because I know you have a very deep and broad mandate at Mubadala, which I think is really interesting, but also you've been very involved with the Middle Eastern Public Relations Association, and you're very involved with the leadership and the development of communications across the region, and obviously with your network globally. What can you share in terms of some of the learnings and perhaps some of the changes that you see being brought to those who are responsible for communications in their organizations?
Yeah, first I think was a recognition. You can tell by the hair on my chin that I've been around a while, but I have a very young team, and as a company, we're a pretty young organization, and a lot of our portfolio companies have employees under the age of 30, and they've never been through anything like this kind of crisis where you see a total disruption in business, and they weren't quite sure what to do. And I think for them, it was a great exercise in prioritizing the communications chain out to employees first, thinking about customers and how do we communicate and what do we communicate with customers. We have a very broad portfolio, as you mentioned, Sandra, over 150 companies. They're all trying to take cues from us in different geographies. You know, do we shut down completely? Do we allow employees to work from home? In certain key industries like healthcare, are they allowed to come back in and work from the office or in their healthcare facility? And you know, we've got the added complexity of Mubadala being owned by the Abu Dhabi government, so we can't do anything that's contrary to the health and safety regulations that are put out there by the Department of Health. So on the one hand, we had to stay very close and consistent to the government and the regulators to make sure we were following the rules and communicating all the right signals. And at the same time, you know, it really gave a lot of the younger members of the team experience in something that I think will serve them quite well. And our collective message as a leadership team was, look, learn from this, flag things that you see that may not be, that may not feel right or don't seem right. But our role is to be kind of reassuring and to give them guidance, and a lot of guidance. Our CEO is very communication savvy. He got it from the very beginning. He understood the implications of our role, not just as a shareholder, but almost as a protector and guide for a lot of these portfolio companies. And his message was, we really have to over communicate. There's no danger in being transparent about where we are. The worst thing we could do is shrink from the situation and not communicate and have 100 different solutions to this. So we tried to be proactive as we could be. And I think that served us. And I think there's now other companies within the UAE who are looking to Mubadala. What are they doing? Companies that are not quite our size, but that are in similar industries. And there was a bit of a modeling effect what our CEO called, we have to be a role model for the industry in everything we do. And I think that helped. Mubadala is well known here, and there's an added pressure of being a standard by which people measure themselves, but it also allowed us to ensure consistency around the country and around the portfolio.
Yeah, we always talk about the responsibility of leadership. Yeah, the greater an organization you are, the more responsibility you have than anyone else around you. So certainly you're living that. Before I go into my next question, there's a great question from our guest, Nick Archer, who is at Rio Tinto. I don't know if you can see his question, but he's saying, if emotional connectivity is the nirvana of employee engagement, how has Mubadala sought to achieve this?
Yeah, it's a great question. We found ourselves dealing with, particularly in the months of April and May, with a lot of data. And when people were working from home, you literally are disconnected. So you slightly, you feel disconnected. As much as we would all love to be together today, it's a remote sense. And one of the things that we really thought about was when it became clear we were going to try and come back in the office after June in shifts, right? First, the workforce came back in shifts of 3. Now we're back in shifts of 2 with much of the leadership team, including myself, working out of the office every day. And we had put together a couple of proposals that were kind of clinical, kind of scientific, that were very rules-based. Thou shalt not wear a mask, thou shalt sit 6 feet away from each other. And nothing about that felt very satisfying, either in terms of enticing people to come back to the office, because we wanted that collaboration, albeit under safe guidelines. But it didn't really feel like us. We're a fairly emotive organization, to be honest, for an investment company. So we came up with a campaign called Home to Home. People had obviously felt very comfortable working from home. It's where the government was saying you're the safest if you observe all the rules and regulations, but there's also just a sense of enormous comfort when you're working from home. Your family is around you, that's great. We wanted to replicate that as much as possible. So we started what we called our Home to Home campaign, the office almost as a second home, where you reunite under the appropriate conditions with colleagues. You see people you haven't seen, in many cases for over 100 days. You at least can have conversations there in the same room, appropriately distanced. And you certainly came back in, and this was not a given, to a building and to other physical facilities like parking and the walk-in and all of that, with the appropriate, hand sanitizers and extra masks and gloves if you needed, and a common understanding that was all born out of a sense of responsibility for each other. This wasn't just you wear a mask to protect yourself, you're wearing a mask to protect your colleagues and their families, since everyone is going to leave that office and go home to their other home. So we really tried in rolling out that campaign a couple of weeks before we invited people back to the office to evoke this sense of a second home, of a safe place, of a welcoming place. We did some preview videos that allowed people to sort of see what it would be like to go back in, the kind of screening measures you'd have to show on your phone. And we're not always touchy-feely, but we tried to get that as much as we could into that home-to-home campaign, just to reassure people that their colleagues who know and love them would welcome them back, and it was a safe place to be.
Brian, there's another great question from the wonderful Di Burton, who asks, did you create a new narrative for the pivot that you talk about to being a global relief company? And if so, what was the process to get to that space?
Yeah, we did a kind of triple axle of crazy this year. The first was obviously the whole pivot to a remote working situation, which is still, it's going to last through the year. where we don't have 100% of the employees back in the office. That's one big challenge. The second big challenge was this, and these relief efforts are ongoing, but they were largely, I would say, loaded into Q2 and Q3. And then we decided to do something that was really led by our CEO, which was, we had put in place a 2020 strategy, and he came to the conclusion in late April and early May, after discussions with our board, which are chaired by the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi and the Deputy Prime Minister of the country, so very high up government officials, that in the midst of uncertainty, we weren't going to pause our business strategy. And as we continued this relief effort, it also meant that we were going to continue what our CEO started to call a vintage year. And by that, he meant if you look back at what Mubadala did in 2020, 5 years from now, you would say that the decisions that we made in 2020 really set us up for success over the next 5 years and perhaps in the long term. And that meant staying with a lot of investments we intended to make. In some situations, the valuations came down, so we were able to take advantage of that as an investor. In other situations, valuations really didn't change, but because others had not stepped up to the table and were being more cautious, it allowed us to get to the front of the line. So with a remote workforce, starting this whole We Are Dedicated effort to help our portfolio, we decided nonetheless to make this a vintage year and stay with our strategy. And what it's showed, and there have been some stories and more to come on this, is that among all the sovereign funds and a lot of our peers, that they probably did what was right for their business, but we did what we thought was right for our business, which was to really double down in the face of the pandemic, in the face of where other people may have had a little bit of hesitation and doubt. We decided to go ahead. I can tell you that has also raised morale. We haven't, as we look 45 days roughly left in the year, we haven't stopped investing. We've continued our activity. It's kept us all extremely busy. And I think that has definitely, the whole vintage year, been part of our story, part of our narrative. Particularly this week, we're talking in a week where our CEO has had 3 different webcasts with different populations within the workforce to talk about that vintage year concept and to look back and make sure that we end the year on a high, knowing, again, the macroeconomic environment being slightly uncertain, but doing it on our own terms.
There's a number of questions, Brian, relating to that. Obviously, given the economic climate that we're all in, that you're working through, you obviously still have that mandate, to deliver and capitalize on opportunities and so on. And you've pivoted in terms of how you've addressed that and how you're thinking about that. Questions from the audience are coming around saying, how are you able to bake in changes in ESG principles for yourselves and for your partnership companies, your portfolio companies, and how are you doing that?
Yeah, this was the big topic, right? My boss hadn't been to Davos in 10 years, and he thought this was the year to go back. ESG is becoming a hot topic, certainly the hot topic at Davos this year. We had traditionally been undefined in our ESG framework, despite the fact that Mubadala was really born out of a sentiment that is ESG driven. And what I mean by that is Mubadala had created the first solar, renewable energy company, Masdar, in the region back in 2006. Some people at the time thought that was kind of an unusual idea for a hydrocarbon-rich nation, and yet the foresight of our leadership was there to create that company way back when. Those principles of supporting the community have always been baked into how we do business, no matter where we are. If we're in Latin America or if we're in Asia, we've got our portfolio companies that are charged with making sure that they don't do any damage to the community. In fact, that they support the community and get the community on their side. We've got other companies that have done pretty significant things in terms of their own ESG activities, but we had not defined a framework. So late last year, we thought, okay, this is the year to do that. Of course, COVID hit. I think it's fair to say that we paused that process for a month or two, but like everything else with 2020, we've resumed that framework. We just joined the One Planet Sovereign Wealth Fund initiative, which aligns us with Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, our other sovereign wealth entity here in Abu Dhabi. And what we envision for 2021 and beyond is, just as our investment committee that meets every Tuesday considers financial criteria to make an investment, they're also now going to think about ESG criteria. What does it mean along all three of those categories? How do we score it? We're working out that whole way of governing that process, but that's going to become baked into how we make decisions as an investment company. Now, that doesn't put us ahead of the pack. A lot of companies are already doing that. I think what it does for us is that it goes back to our heritage and makes sure that we're true to that heritage and how we've always thought, but formalizes it in a way that all of those ESG stakeholders can start to ask the appropriate hard questions of us, and making sure that we're meeting all of the framework guidelines and all the principles that we ascribe to within the ESG world.
Thank you, Brian. And there are a number of questions that are coming through that are specific to Mubadala, but also to the region in which you operate. And if I stay with one that's specific to Mubadala, this is from Steve Earle, who asks if, has your approach to evaluating the effectiveness of communications changed at all this year? Are you looking to listen differently? Are you doing things more frequently? Are you changing what you're looking at?
Yeah, that's a great question. We decided to keep the things that were sacred to us. The things that are sacred are our employee surveys, our pulse surveys, our focus groups. We just felt that there was never a better time than to stay close to the organization and what it was thinking than during this time of incredible change and upheaval. And we thought, okay, we're going to stick with that, but we also want to add and double down in places that we were underweighted, if you will. So in the past, we've always had, CEO discussions with the organization twice a year, typically in the spring with all employees and typically in the fall with our senior leadership. We decided during Ramadan, which was in May and June of this year, where you have roughly a month of a different way of working. The work hours are shorter. Obviously, observant Muslims are fasting. So it's a slightly different work schedule. But there is a lot of hunger during that period of time, no pun intended, for content as well as food and water. And what we realized is that in the past, we might have used that as an opportunity to talk about, what is Ramadan? What does it mean? Why is it so important? We kept those things, but what we thought it would be additive to that was what we called our Ramadan Leadership Majlis. So we had our top 10 leaders every couple of days just kind of riff at night after work hours, talking about their area of responsibility in a very relaxed, kind of informal way, just as you do in a casual majlis setting here in the Emirates, sharing ideas, asking questions, of course, using it all the technology tools and virtual nature of that. And what we found was it was so popular that we decided to continue it. That added a burden on us as a comms team to set a conversation like this up on a more regular basis and to test whether people liked it and what kind of questions they wanted to ask. But it stuck, and I think it only reinforced for us the importance of that regular, constant dialogue, even on an informal basis. And to be honest, it changed a lot of our executives' perception of how often they should be talking about their business to the whole company. Before COVID, I think they were used to this structured, formal, almost state of the company kind of forums a couple times a year. Now they're more than willing to get on a Zoom or Blue Jeans or Microsoft Teams call and talk with the whole organization about last week's deal or what's coming up or how they're reacting to a certain situation that they're managing. So that, I think, has been a great eye-opener for us and something that will stay with us.
It's so encouraging to hear, Brian, because we certainly saw many companies not wanting to talk, being afraid to talk, not wanting to either go out or, embrace their teams. And it's very, just really refreshing to hear your experience. And again, this is partly reflected in some other questions that we're getting. And one from Dominic Cheatham just saying, was the situation perhaps more manageable? Is it more manageable given the culture, the environment that you work in? Very particular culture, very particular politics, gentler media environment as well. How much of that is cultural, geopolitical specific? And that's aligned to another question that also has come up from Marty Carafa, who said, if you were doing this in the US with the same kind of leadership, would you have done it the same way? So again, how much is this cultural? How much is this specific to your own environment?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is specific, I think, country by country, as we're seeing different countries take different approaches. First of all, the UAE acted quite early to shut down all the schools, to close all of the businesses or put restrictions on businesses, restaurants, etc. And for their public sector workers, and there's a significant public sector here, Abu Dhabi is the capital, to send them all home and work from home. And typically the business sector, the private sector, takes its cues from government recommendations. So that was fairly uniform, I would say. The other is whether it's led by example, and certainly it is in this country, there was no debate over whether a mask was required or not, right? There was modeling by Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, who is the leader of this country, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, who was clearly following all the safety guidelines, wearing a mask. There was no debate over whether it was effective or not. None of the silliness, frankly, that's going on in the US and certain other parts of the world now. And I just think that uniformity of both example and the trust in the leadership, speaking of the ECHO report on trust, took a heavy burden away from those of us who might not only have to go out and communicate a way of doing things, but also the right way of doing things. We didn't have to, prove that a mask was good or that social distancing was important. So I think those behavioral things were much easier here than they would be in the US. The other benefit, yes, it's a small country, but there are a lot of small countries that didn't act as quickly as the UAE to secure the right PPE, the right testing regimen. One example is I'd love to go home and see my parents for Thanksgiving. I'm not able to do that because despite the fact that I can go in my own building downstairs and get a COVID test at 4 o'clock and have the results by 4:15, and on an app on my phone that I can show to the border guard when I come back home in Dubai, I don't even know where to get a test in the US or how many days it will take to get the result and who I get authority to allow me to cross a state line. So the uniformity, if you will, of the system here was a tremendous advantage. If we were in the US, or how do we treat employees in different geographies? I don't know how we would have done it differently in the US, to be honest, other than trying to, use our heads and use logic and follow the same intuitive common sense that we would have here. What we did do with our offices in places like Russia, which spiked early, in places like China and Brazil, which had very early spikes, and Brazil still undergoing it, and in the US, was they have to follow, obviously, their particular state regulatory recommendation, depending on where they are in the US, but also to allow us to recommend that they work from home. So it was a kind of a hybrid approach. So far, it's worked well. We've tracked and traced. We have had COVID infections within the company. We've got a fairly rigid track and trace system. So whenever anyone is infected, they're sent home. They get medical care that's administered by the government. And we immediately send everyone else that they've been in contact with home for a period of quarantine until they test negative and can come back to work.
An interesting year of change and risk. Brian, thank you so much. I know there are more questions, a lot around how the West can engage better with the Middle East, things that we should learn from you. I know we'd love to stay, but we can't. So I think with that, I'd like to end and just really reflect that it's been said that balancing risk and uncertainty may be COVID-19's biggest lesson. And what a joy to hear how you've turned it into what you call a vintage year, which is just so inspiring. You've shown how well many organizations are learning, particularly yours, and how you're pivoting and changing as a result. So thank you for sharing that with us today. Given where we are post-US elections and pre-US Thanksgiving, which you mentioned, Brian, I feel it apt to probably end on two quotes. One, going back a little bit in time from George Washington, who said, "Perseverance and spirit have done wonders in all ages." And I think what we've just heard today very much is a testament to that. Coming a little bit fast forward to a not too distant president, we have George H.W. Bush. I don't often quote him, but he did say this lovely quote, which says, "I do not mistrust the future. I do not fear what it is ahead. For our problems are large, but our heart is larger." So I think with that, Brian, thank you for sharing with us Mubadala's journey of wonder. I think, yes, you've led with your mind, but you've led with your heart as well. And that's really inspiring. So thank you again, all of you, for joining us today. I hope you'll be able to join us next Tuesday when Susan Hooper, ECHO's advisory board member and serial non-executive director on Uber and many other impressive boards, and also director of ever-expanding Chapter Zero. She will be in conversation with Andy Farah from Mars. He's Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Sustainability, all about building back better. So I hope you can join us. I look forward to seeing you there. If you need the links again, it's here on the screen, or let us know. And thank you for being part of today's conversation. Wishing you all a safe and happy afternoon. All the best. Bye for now.